I remember going to interview for a graphics job for this company to build out their catalog. The vibes I was getting from the interviewer were okay, not the best. Then they brought in the art director to talk to me, and they proceeded to get into a flat-out, full-on argument right in front of me, and over something very small about the graphic direction of this catalog. I went out of there and called my recruiter and told them this and said, I am not taking this position. Right after that, I got a position working for an ad agency that was handling one of the biggest fast food chains at the time. So that's what I can think of that leads into this video subject. What's the biggest bullet you've dodged in your life? Story 1. Got a roommate when my husband and I moved into a rental house. It was a 2-bedroom, and we only needed one, so we figured splitting the rent would be a good financial choice. So a friend of mine that I'd known on and off for the last 8 years moved in, and there were some red flags that started popping up right away. Like when I suggested getting 2 fridges so space between she and us would be clearly defined. And also, I'm a hunter, and told her she did not want to share a fridge with me during hunting season. Then she decided she absolutely hated my parents, who had put her up for 3 months before this because she needed a place to stay. Then she was avoiding me when I tried to get her to sit down with us and write up a list of do's and don'ts of roommating, and also wanted her to sign a paper saying that she would pay her half of the rent. She continued to excuse herself and cast blame on other things. Finally, 10 days after she moved in, I told her Saturday morning she had to sit down with us and have it in writing that she would pay us every month and help us make a list of what was okay or not for living together. And that morning, there was a note on her door saying to "Leave me alone, please," in a big Sharpie marker. Of course, I tried to talk to her anyway and got screamed at for my trouble. So I did the next best thing and brought my wonderful mom over and mapped out a route to go to yard sales together through town. Meanwhile, my roommate called the cops because a woman she hated had entered her house. So we had to reassure the police that I had invited my mother and that my controlling roommate seemed to be trying to isolate me from my loved ones so I'd be easier to manipulate or something. We had a good laugh and went yard sailing. But meanwhile, I also called the landlord and informed her of the issue, to which she responded right away in saying that the woman had 30 days to get off the property, which was great. But we weren't going to stay there with her. She was so angry I knew she was going to try to poison us or something. And this is where the bullet gets dodged, see? Because I would have had to live with her or my husband, and I would have had to spend the next month on my parents' couch. But that was taken care of very handily when we got home and I tried to talk to her. She still wouldn't hear me without yelling, so I told the landlord to send her the eviction text because I wasn't able to break it to her nicely, on account that she wouldn't let me speak to her. So I went about my day and took a shower. Didn't finish the shower because not 5 minutes later, a crazy lady comes pounding on the door saying that she isn't leaving and that she will unalive us both in our sleep if we don't get out of her house. I get dressed just in time for her to break the door hinges to the bathroom with many more unaliving threats and profanities. I come out and talk to her with a calm demeanor. "We have been nice to you, Tiffany, but you can't stay here if you act like this." And the woman has the nerve to threaten me with a machete. Now, I said before I was a hunter, but forgot to mention that I had my best hunting knife on me at the time and was 100% ready to take her in a fight. And I knew I could. So she backed off and went into her room. How anticlimactic. But then my husband saved the day by revealing that he had been just on the other side of the door right in front of the argument, recording every word. She was arrested and removed the same hour. And we've only seen her once to collect her things. Guess I don't need a knight in shining armor to fight my battles. I just need someone smart enough to record it. Perfect. Gosh. Can you imagine if I had to live with that raving lunatic for a whole month? Thanks for threatening me with a machete in my own house, Tiffany. Made it super easy to get rid of you. Bullet dodged. It sounds like this person was just planning on squatting in the house. I'm pretty sure if she just avoided saying anything or signing any paperwork officially saying she would pay some part of the rent, that after a certain amount of time, she would be almost impossible to get out. I think it would take maybe years to get out of there at that point. Good thing she couldn't control her crazy at that point. Story 2. I'm going to try and keep this as friendly as possible due to YouTube reasons, but I have a story of how I possibly dodged a bullet. When I was younger, I was desperate for love, because I was depressed and thought no one loved me. Met this one guy. He was a bit older than me, but I loved him. And around other people in the chat app I met him on, he was sweet, loved cheesecake, and was an absolute sweetheart. I broke up with a guy I was dating in there because he never talked to me and left without saying goodbye. So I went to that one guy I was seeing. He said his name was Kane. I have no clue if that was his real name or not, but I stuck with it. He thought I was still dating my ex, so after we hooked up in text, he dumped me for his best friend. She was my enemy, but we quickly became friends and I actually started to fall for her. I'm pansexual. Then she broke up with Kane and said he was toxic, and I never saw her again. My heart broke, but I didn't believe he was toxic. But he was in the UK, and I was in the US, so we didn't see each other in real life unless we video called or so. But if he got mad, he said he'd hit me. And every time we fought, he would yell and be so angry. But he was sweet most of the time. He cheated a couple of times, even though COVID unalived me and didn't care, and went on with another girl. I was hurt, but the girls that he dated all said to me he was toxic, but my little butt didn't think anything of it. Then he started showing me in real life pictures from the dark web that scared me. I thought he used me for my body. I got in trouble with my parents and things kept getting worse. I started seeing my middle school sweetheart again and tried to take my mind off of Kane, and he accused me of cheating. I admit it, but I had a reason. But he denied cheating when I said he did it too, even though he did when our relationship was still fresh. He got a job as a hitman, and he kept showing me videos of self-termination. I had a problem with it because of my depression, and I slowly disposed of him. He even manipulated me into thinking he was helping some friends I had, but they didn't like what he was saying and thought I was a monster and broke friendship with me, and tried to sabotage my channel. Enough was enough when I broke up with him last year when I told him he needed someone better. He kept saying if I'd left him, he would harm himself or anything but the way he acted. If I still dated him and went to the UK to be with him, I think I would have been unalived by him in the future because he just got so toxic and terrible. To this day, I believe I dodged a huge bullet because I would have been unalive in the future if I was still with him. Long-distance relationships can be really tricky. At least this person was really showing their cards when they behaved the way they did. I can't really believe she was willing to just get up and move without even just visiting first to see how things went. She didn't even know if his real name was Kane or not. I think that's kind of a red flag right there. A big one. Story 3. I once dodged not a bullet, but a nuke. I was waiting for the bus to go to my local high school when I heard the screech of tires and whipped my head to the side in time to see a car barreling down the street and coming right at me. The stop I was at had very little nearby except a very thick pole. Think the kind used for power lines, so they could take a lot of damage. I jumped behind it and hoped it would be enough to either block the car from me or at least lessen the impact enough for me to survive. The car crashed into it, and the driver expired on impact, body hanging out the windshield with his head flattened against the pole. After I was able to calm down from the near-unalive experience, I dialed 911 to explain what happened and where I was. After I got off the line with the operator, I called my mom to explain everything. She left work to come get me, and the bus showed up around the same time as the cops and ambulance. I explained, and the bus driver was told to move on as the cops had questions for me, and they didn't want minors near the scene. I got the day off and was sent to the school counselor the next day to make sure I was all right. It took 7 years of therapy to get in a car without zoning out to music so I don't have a panic attack. For those who are wondering how fast the car was going, I asked the cops, and they said that by the look of the damage, the car was wrapped around the pole. The pole was heavily crooked to the point that the only thing keeping it held up are the wires connected to it, and the driver's seatbelt failed to lock up like normal despite the fact he was wearing it. I can only imagine the force needed for that to happen. He must have been going 100+ miles per hour. If there is such a thing as God, this is proof that miracles are real. I did rideshare driving for a while in the big city. I was on the road enough to see my fair share of accidents. Probably more than my fair share. I never saw any of the people and what kind of condition or state they were in, but many times it was enough to just see the twisted wrecks of the cars or what was left of them. It was awful. That was enough to make me extra careful when I was on the road. Story 4. A little over a year ago, my mother and I were visiting a college I might go to next year. We both had a good impression. This isn't going the direction you think it's going. As we were driving back home, we lived an hour away, a car crossed the middle of the interstate and went onto our side, hitting us. My mom lost control and we were pushed onto the snow. The car flipped over at least twice and landed on its wheels. I could go into details about everything that happened, but not all details are needed. When our car stopped, both me and my mother were okay. The only injury either of us had was me having a swollen nose. We checked later that day. It wasn't even broken. Of course, we called 911 and they helped us. The driver of the other car also crashed and was put in an ambulance, but they were okay. This was winter in South Dakota, so that explains why their car lost control. Again, this was South Dakota, so the speed limit on interstates was 80 miles an hour. We were so lucky we escaped virtually unscathed. Ironically, I'm currently attending the college I visited that day. A more minor detail, but after getting rescued, people searched our totaled car to find things inside of it. One person found my glasses, completely intact. I forgot I wasn't wearing them. This part is less important, but still bizarre. Story 5. Have one about dating. When I was in my mid-20s, I connected with a girl on an LDS dating site. We chatted for a bit, and I went to see her down at BYU. I lived in a more northern part of the state. Drove an hour and a half to go see this girl. I get there, and she nonchalantly says she can't go out right now because she's going sledding soon with someone else. So I drove an hour and a half to see this girl for 20 minutes to just turn around and go home. I was peeved, but wanted to give her another shot. Cue my oldest sister. No, I've seen girls like her before, and she's a shrew. Do not go see her again. Let her make the next move. Make her come this way, but don't go see her. I took her advice and heard nothing from this girl ever again. I was, at that point, almost done with dating because nothing had worked out. Then, my now wife messaged me on the same site. The decision to give it one last shot is the defining decision in my life. We met, dated, and soon after got married. Had I not made those two decisions, my life would have gone on a much different and probably worse track. As it stands now, happily married, 4 kids, and in a job I enjoy that pays enough for a comfortable life.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 6. Well, this is my story. It happened some years ago. I was into urban exploration on abandoned houses at the time. So I found this place that had an open door and tons of cool stuff to see. So I started going there often. By the 3rd day of exploring, I noticed that the place wasn't abandoned. Well, it was, but not completely. The owner of the place had his home connected to the abandoned and decaying place. So by then, I kind of freaked out. But since he didn't notice me, I continued to explore, till one day, I went to the place at night to my last exploration. I entered the place as usual and heard the owner of the place from far away snoring. A couple of minutes go by and I noticed something. The owner wasn't snoring anymore. So I turned off my flashlight and got the hell out of there in the darkness. While escaping, I noticed the place where I had just been was now with the lights turned on. I climbed on a wall and ran the hell away from there. I climbed on a tree to hide myself, and a few minutes later, I saw the police lights heading to the place. I've never been so close to being arrested, and after that day, I stopped the urban exploration. It's something seriously dangerous if you go to the wrong places. So wait, this guy's regular house was connected to this abandoned place? For what reason? Maybe it was sentimental value. Maybe someone he knew lived there and just couldn't bear to clean it up after they passed or something. It seems like kind of a waste of a place. In this economy, he's probably better off fixing the place up and renting it out. Story 7. My story. This one's recent. A year ago, I met this girl on a beach, and she asked for my number. I gave it to her, and we talked for a bit. I liked her, she liked me, but something was off. She was a bit too intense, and she wanted to come to my house and do it, barely knowing me for a week. Uncharacteristically, for a man, I backed off, and with time, we stopped talking. Months passed after we stopped talking. Like 3 or 4 months from now, she started dating another guy. Nothing weird, and she and I were never anything, so I wasn't mad or something like that. Well, flash forward to a few weeks ago, and she posted pictures of her baby's gender reveal party, with less than 3 months of dating this guy. That's the moment I thank God for making me think with my head instead of my pee-pee. Story 8. When I was a kid, me and my parents, I don't remember if my siblings were also in the car, were driving back home, and it was a really rainy day. The visibility got so low one couldn't even see what was right in front of them. My father, stubborn as he usually was, decided to drive all the same, as he knew the path step by step, until a young me yelled, "Stop!" Usually, my father wouldn't heed to my advice, but he miraculously did. And as he did so, lightning cracked and a tree fell right before our car. We had to run in reverse for a while and eventually find another route back home. If I didn't yell to my father to stop, maybe neither me nor my mom would still be around to this day. My father passed away years later due to a heart attack, sadly. Story 9. A few weeks ago, a foundry that my husband and I used to work at caught fire. I'm talking a massive fire that burned down a large portion of the building, took several hours to fight, and that required multiple fire hoses to help even contain it, let alone get it out. The area it started is where the iron is melted down into this almost lava-like substance that is then used to shape parts. I literally had nightmares about that area catching fire while we were in the building, but my husband thought I was crazy because it had been over a decade since the place had had a major incident. When we found out why about 10 fire trucks went screaming by a few weeks ago, he admitted I was right to be worried, and I admitted that I didn't want to be. Were they just not scheduled for that day? Was it their day off or were they on vacation? It doesn't mention anything about the injuries that occurred at the place. Were there any injuries? Were there any fatalities? Hopefully not. Story 10. Almost got run over by a car once. I just got off the school bus with a guy I talked to on the way back home since we knew each other from primary school, and our houses were close by each other. We always walked behind the bus before crossing the street since it was most convenient, but the bus was so loud it was difficult to hear any surrounding cars. Like an idiot, I attempted to cross the road behind the bus without looking, and the guy I walked with pulled me back just as a car went racing by. I thanked him, and we never talked about it again. Another crazy thing is that he usually doesn't take the bus, but only did for a while on this occasion since he had broken his arm and couldn't ride his bike to school. Story 11. When I was in high school, there was this one person to whom I was attracted for a little bit. Let's call them D. One day, D and their friend tried to get me to answer who was better looking in front of the entire class. By this point, I was a lot less attracted to D, but I was just as angry. Later, we were having a spring performance, and D went out on stage, not in costume and acting like a fool. A friend of mine who was abused by a substance-addicted parent told me that later on that D was acting that way because D was high the night of that performance. I trust my friend's judgment since they had seen enough to recognize when someone was high. I think D was the biggest bullet I ever dodged. Story 12. I suffered from viral encephalitis when I was 7 years old. I remember suddenly being unable to eat or lift my head and seeing pink instead of white before blacking out. My parents rushed me to the ER, and by the time the nurses sent me to my hospital room, I was conscious and relatively stable. Slight memory loss just as I woke up, but it got better. Plenty of people who go through that risk being in a coma for a time or with some limbs paralyzed, if not termination, of course. I, however, only got a few days in the hospital and a month in home recovery. My grandpa was a medic and was flabbergasted to see me jump on the bed as usual a few days from the hospital leave. Story 13. My sister was trying to set me up on a date with her former boyfriend's friend. I say former because he passed away, and I just wasn't feeling it. I just had a feeling he wasn't for me, and he was trouble. He got upset with me for not giving him a chance. I just couldn't shake that feeling. Years later, my sister sent me a message saying that same guy, she sent me a picture too, went to jail for nearly beating his girlfriend to termination. That could have been me, and thank the heavens for trusting my gut and not opening my heart to this guy. Listen to your gut, people. There may not be a reason in the moment, but sometimes there may be one in the future. Story 14. Here's my story. Was on a school week-long trip with my dad, little sister, and cousin in a big city. About our second to last day there, a lady came up to me and gave me a flower, and then said I had to pay for it. My sister and dad grabbed me and pulled me away, as well as shoving the flower back to her. When we were a safe distance away, my dad explained that there were reports about women dressed like her, where one would sell the flower, and if the buyer was rich enough, would also put a mark on them to tell one of the others to rob that person. While I didn't have much money on me, safe to say, bullet dodged. Story 15. I used to do parkour and rooftop climbing when I was about 12 until I was about 16. One time, me and my friends decided to climb our school, and upon getting onto the highest rooftop, approximately 35 feet, I ran and jumped onto the ledge, thinking that there was another rooftop on the other side if I were to fall. Plot twist? There was no other rooftop, just a massive drop towards one of those spiked metal fences. To this day, I feel extremely lucky that I was good at parkour as a kid. Otherwise, I never would have stuck the landing on that ledge. And if I hadn't terminated, I'd surely be disfigured. Story 16. I had a near miss. Was on vacation with my parents in Seattle. We were planning on doing the duck tours. They use amphibious vehicles to tour the city early one morning. But I was feeling a little sick that morning, so we had a late start. By the time we got there, the whole thing was shut down, and we didn't find out why until later that night. Turns out there was a huge crash that morning with a charter bus that terminated a lot of people. Just look up Duck Tours crash to find news about it. I'm certain me being late saved at least one of our lives. Story 17. Straight out of school, late 80s, I tried to pursue my dream of becoming a professional dancer. Joined a cabaret dance troupe while still holding a day job at a bank. Business was picking up and it was getting to the point of needing to quit the day job, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It got really ugly and I left. I found out later the head of this setup took the troupe to the Far East and abandoned the girls there. It was a front for human trafficking, long before Google was even a concept. Decided to hide in an office job since then. Story 18. In high school, there was a girl in my German class who really liked me. She wasn't bad-looking, but wasn't my type, so I regularly declined her advances. Years later, I met my wife's stepfamily. Turns out, my wife's stepbrother hooked up with that girl from high school and married her. That girl got heavy into substances, and they eventually divorced my wife's stepbrother. Turns out she had some heavy psychological problems, which is why she turned to substances. I tell my wife all the time that I'm glad I dodged that bullet.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.